Hey guys, let's talk about what's going on with the criminal investigation in California into Marilyn Manson. There was some news on that yesterday. So let's set the stage again. For a while, there's been a rumor from TMZ that the investigation was going to close. There'd be no recommendation for charges. That was just a rumor. Then last week, the district attorney for Los Angeles came out and said, hey, listen, we don't have the case from the sheriff yet. When we do get it, which we hope to get it this month, we're going to look over it. We got a team of experienced prosecutors and we'll make a decision on what happens at that point. So that was a public update the DA gave. Then yesterday, the sheriff's department released information saying, hey, we've now turned over this case to the district attorney's office. Shortly after that, the district attorney said, we got part of the case. When we get the rest of the case, that's when we're going to review it and look at it. Is that strange? Yeah, that's all real strange for these for this information to be coming out in public like that, separate from these agencies. That's bizarre. So I want to get into that a little bit and also provide maybe a little bit more color on why this is happening like it's happening. First, I'll mention that Andrew Burkhart made a video and put it out with a lot of logic in it that I support, saying that the timing of this situation, that the DA makes a statement and shortly thereafter the sheriff delivers this case to the DA, suggests that probably there's, at least as I understood her video, probably nothing really happened in that intervening time point, and they just given the case over to the DA because the DAs had put it out in public that it's their problem, and the sheriff is saying now it's your problem. That if the case were mature and ready, it would have been turned over anyway. And I think that's true. So it's kind of like a nasty hot potato. The case is not fully baked and nobody really wants it. So, hey, they've got it. It's their problem. No, now you've got it. And then the DA almost instantly comes back and says, no, we don't really have all of it. And she makes the point, too, that if there were smoking gun conclusive case in the part they did get, they could go forward with the prosecution. They really don't have to wait for more information. So I agree with all of that. And I think it doesn't look good for the case based on that. Now, that is a layer of speculation, right? But sometimes that's what you do is you speculate. And as long as you identify it as that and you're ready to modify that based on real evidence that comes in, I think it's fine to do. But I want to go back and look at this a little bit and also lay out the relationship between the DA and the sheriff and why I think it's contributing to this disaster. So in theory, when a criminal complaint is made, the sheriff's going to investigate it, gather the evidence. And if that evidence is sufficient and the investigation completes, refer it to the district attorney for charges. The DA will review the file and decide whether this case can be prosecuted and whether they think they can get a conviction. If they do, then they may, at that point, decide to file charges, get the person arrested, move on with the case. So in this episode of Speculation Nation, what we'll do is we'll try and look at the actual facts that we know, which are few. We can speculate some from that, and then we'll regroup on some facts again and try not to pile too much speculation on speculation. So we'll start off with a factual rock base and build a little house of cards on it, see what it looks like. We'll tear it down, and we'll do it again as we move through how this case was handled. So the first thing is there actually was, of course, criminal investigation. We all know that's true. It's ongoing. By the sheriff's department into the allegations against, or at least some of the allegations against Marilyn Manson. We don't know the details of those allegations, of course, nor do we know what evidence the sheriff got or didn't get, or even what the sheriff thinks about the case, the deputies and the detectives involved. We don't know any of those things. But we know the case was held on to for well over a year. And this allows speculation house of cards to develop in two directions, depending on which lie you want to believe, that you want to tell yourself if you think you know this instead of just speculating. But here it is. If there were smoking gun evidence, if the witnesses gave credible evidence with supporting evidence and they raided Manson's home and they found things that supported that, why would they hang on to the case for well over a year? Answer, they probably wouldn't, right? So if they had a super strong case a long time ago, why would it make any sense to hang on to the case? It really doesn't, right? So if you're a Manson fan, you can say, look, they've had forever to investigate this case. They've had access to all the law enforcement tools that you can want. Those can be more powerful than the civil discovery tools. So if there were evidence that he committed this crime, this case is just sitting on somebody's desk, it must not be that strong, or maybe it doesn't exist at all. So for that reason, I already think he's innocent, and this supports my contention, and I would agree with you on that. Now, on the other hand, if you're someone who supports the accusers, then you can also say they've had this case for a long time for a reason. If they thought it was bogus, they would have closed this file a long time ago. Why have they kept it open? One line of speculation there is They have some evidence, and maybe they believe at least one or more of the accusers, but they don't have what they feel like is enough evidence to tell the DA, here's everything you need to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. They just believe it. We've got the guy. We just don't have all the evidence yet. And that, of course, happens in criminal cases frequently. So that could also be true. We just don't know which one it is. So that's, to me, the two legitimate lines of speculation based on the first piece of real evidence we have, which is this investigation has been ongoing for over a year. The next thing we know is the DA comes out and says, well, we don't have the case yet, but when we get it from the sheriff, then we're going to review it and decide what to do about it and make appropriate decision on whether there'll be charges or not. And that was a good statement from the DA. I think it's a fair statement, and it's okay that it's made. In other jurisdictions, maybe that statement by itself wouldn't seem but so out of place. But I'm going to show you some things here in a minute that let you know this is not a normal situation. So shortly after the DA makes this statement, the sheriff then releases a statement, hey, we've turned over this file to the DA. Well, I mean, did they have a complete file there ready to go, proof beyond a reasonable doubt and all that, and they just were sitting on it? I mean, that doesn't seem realistic. And if that's not the case, then the file that got turned over may not be the most compelling file ever. But almost immediately, the DA comes back and says, well, we didn't get the whole file. So when we do get the whole file, that's when we're going to look at it. So to me, unfortunately, this goes from a DA making what appears to be an innocuous statement to just a mess, a public battle of social media posts by the law enforcement agencies. And this isn't good for victims or citizens of this area. However, they're the ones who vote these people into office, so this is what they get. So what is going on here? And I think it's instructive to look at the war between the sheriff's department and the DA that has raged on all kinds of fronts, and understand that could be a motivation why this case is being handled the way it is, at least from an information disclosure standpoint. So this DA and the sheriff, they don't like each other. They don't have comparable philosophies on how to execute law enforcement function. And that fight and disagreement is played out in public. It's also played out in the handling of thousands and thousands of cases, aside from the Manson case. The DA has said that dealing with the sheriff is, hey, if you wrestle with pigs, you're going to get muddy. That's a nice thing to say about your law enforcement partner, isn't it? Meanwhile, the sheriff says he has no confidence in the district attorney, that the district attorney has made it a policy of essentially not charging and prosecuting crimes by the thousands, crimes that put people in danger. In one case, he bypassed the DA altogether and went to federal authorities to try and handle charges, saying that the DA would not handle this case appropriately. He's also said that tens of thousands of cases have been non-charged or undercharged or inappropriately dealt with, that they work the cases, they develop the files, they send it to the DA, and that's where the process breaks down, according to the sheriff. Politically wise, it's certainly a mixed battle out in California, with the attorney general now interceding to stop the sheriff's department from investigating some officials in that area, taking that investigation away from the sheriff. There was another case where the DA tried to put it on the sheriff when an especially soft decision on a violent crime, that, hey, the sheriff's department was consulted, they concurred in this, and the sheriff's department came out and said, no, we didn't, and they were able to show that. The DA had to walk that back. The DA has been subject to one failed recall out there, maybe another, who knows. It seems like there are a lot of people out there just like violent criminals roaming around, so he does have a support of at least an element of the population. But regardless, straight from the horse's mouth, the sheriff says, we do not have a working relationship with the DA's office. Never met this guy in person. I've only had one phone call with him. So getting it back away from speculation, we have the facts that communication about the Manson case has occurred in social media, with the DA saying, we're waiting on the sheriff's office, sheriff's department coming back and saying, well, here's the case. And then the DA's office almost immediately saying, we didn't get all of it. We'll look at it when you give us the rest of it. That's true. And then also true is the fact that they have just an ongoing battle over all kinds of cases. Those are true things, right? And to me, that indicates that the mess of this Manson case, to some degree, is impacted by the war, the feud between the law enforcement side of it, on the investigation side, the sheriff's department, and the DA's office. They're not getting along. They don't see eye to eye. And this isn't good, obviously, for real victims, regardless of whether you take the DA's side or the sheriff's side or neither or both or whatever. When they don't cooperate well, that's a chance for criminals to exploit the situation. Not talking about Manson here, just talking about in general, that you want an efficient system going on, right? And in theory, you want one that works well and adheres to the ethics rules. And when it doesn't do that, then you get things like maybe cases aren't prosecuted that should be. Maybe cases linger around a lot longer than they should. And this is really unfair to the victims. It's also unfair to the accused, right? Let's say, for instance, that there's no good case against Manson. Why should he have to sit there for a year and a half with this case open, potentially to some degree, because the government side of things, they just aren't getting along? I mean, come on, what's going on here? Refer the case over to the DA and they can make charges or not make charges. And same thing for the people who have accused him, right? Why should they have to wait so long? Now, there are situations where sometimes the investigating agency and also the DA, who, by the way, they're supposed to work together, right? They're not have to be walled off to where they never talk to each other or whatever. Sometimes investigations will stay open, especially if there's a civil case going on, like there are in the Manson cases, because then you can wait and see what civil discovery brings up. And that happened here in a murder case down the street from here involving Nancy Cooper, when her husband ended up testifying in a custody case because he didn't want to lose his kids, so he didn't plead the Fifth Amendment. And that gave the DA's office information they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. It also played out in the Jason Young case when he murdered his wife, and there were civil cases against him, and he wouldn't testify or defend himself, citing the Fifth Amendment because he knew he'd murdered his wife. And so that the prosecution potentially hanging over these guys affected what was going on. So there can be strategic, tactical reasons to have an investigation stay out there. Maybe you're waiting for a little bit more evidence or whatever. But really, does that seem to be the case here? I don't know. It strikes me, and again, here we're back to speculation, that delays in these cases out there maybe have more to do with the working relationship of law enforcement and the DA than it does about the real features of the case. And I think that's unfortunate. So I don't know what's going to happen with this. I guess the sheriff's department has anything from one form they didn't give the DA's office to a whole lot of information they didn't give the DA's office. When these guys are releasing public statements against each other, you don't know why they're doing that and what they really mean by it, because they have this history of fighting with each other. And because they have such a history of fighting with each other, that's one of the reasons why I go back to the kind of the hot potato situation that Andrea brought up, that if this case is not really a good case or one that could have bad publicity depending on how it's handled, then the agencies, instead of cooperating with each other and want to be a united front, they're like, well, he's got it. No, he's got it. No, he's got it. No, he's got it. And that's a little bit of a farce situation. Now, that ultimately, I think, in the end is good for Manson, whether he's innocent or guilty, because whether he's innocent or guilty, he doesn't want to be charged with a crime, right? Either way, right? So the more these people bungle it around and the longer they take, which makes any statute of limitations issues even worse, evidence degrades and things like that. And if they're not accumulating new evidence, then this just all works in his favor eventually. Pretty disappointing if you're an accuser who actually believes that you were abused to see this kind of narrative play out. I mean, I doubt that the accusers can really be well supported by the law enforcement system if there's a great interest in the two principals of those systems battling with each other instead of working together. So I thought I'd show a little bit more color on this of what's going on out there, just for the point that we're all kind of speculating about what does this mean and what's really going to happen. And we don't know the end of that yet. It doesn't look that good, I think, for charges, but you never know. The DA, when DAs are convinced that they do want to bring a charge, they can get pretty creative and they can look at different statutes and things like that. They could potentially talk to the federal side if they think there's a federal side that has a better claim that could survive statute of limitations, say, or the evidence fits better. There's just many different mechanisms. It's not just one crime that you can look at and charge or not charge. They're going to have to look at the spectrum of things if they're interested in bringing charges, see which ones the evidence will support and which ones the statute of limitations will support. Because one thing about California and statute of limitations is they have a lot of them and they change all the time. I tried to look at that a little bit yesterday to think, what are all the potential charges and what are the statute of limitations that surround it and control each one of those? And when you go down that rabbit hole, you find out, well, it depends on whether the alleged act occurred here or during this time frame or later than this or earlier than this. And if this thing happened and that thing happened, and it's pretty confusing to the legal tourist, which is all I am in this situation, is trying to figure out, well, what's going on. I didn't want to spend any more time in it because who knows whether they're going to refer any charges or try to arrest the guy or not. Nobody knows what's really going to happen with this. So that's a little bit of news about this investigation, which is really nothing more than the law enforcement agencies fighting until some of the real things start to happen in the case in the civil side, which starts toward the end of September when the discovery motion gets heard. Then the anti-SLAPP motions will be set at that point for a time frame when they'll actually be heard. But the discovery stuff is important. I mean, these cases should eventually get into discovery. Also, at the end of the month, the situation with Ashley Smithline and her attorney's withdrawal hopefully will be settled. And then after that, they can get these cases back on track again and start doing discovery. They had already discussed not only, of course, deposing Ashley Smithline, but deposing Manson himself and other central figures in the case. And eventually, that's where the rubber hits the road, is when these people go on the record in public, not through anybody's league DMs or Instagram post or that somebody says are hacked or not hacked or whatever. Eventually, people have to go on the record under oath and tell what they know. And I think that, eventually that's going to happen. If these cases are ever going to go to trial, this stuff has to happen well before that. So what we could use right now is less posturing, either by law enforcement or even also these kind of motions in civil court, which don't really get to the heart of the matter of let's find out what the truth is and finally get back to the truth-seeking function of the legal system, which takes a long time, obviously, to ramp up and to deliver any results. I mean, these cases have all been pending how long? We don't know a whole lot more for certain than you did when the cases were filed in the first place. But eventually that will change, and your personal view will be more vindicated by the facts, or you'll be challenged by the facts. But either way, the sunshine of facts, I think, is always welcome, and get the clouds of uncertainty out of this, and let's see where this all lands. All right, thanks.